Welcome to the Deconstructing Data podcast. I'm Jessie Lezak, CMO at BDEX, along with David Finkelstein, BDEX's co-founder and CEO. How's it going, David?
It's going well, Jessie. How are you today?
Not too bad. Glad to be here. Per usual, we have a really exciting guest. Today, I'm excited to welcome in Dennison DeGregor, VP and Global Chief Data Officer for Ogilvy Verticurl. Welcome, Dennis, the lead data strategy advisor for Fortune 500 brands globally on enterprise CX, transformation, analytics, and leveraging technology for competitive businesses. And he is here on the Deconstructing Data podcast. So welcome, Dennis.
Thanks, Jessie. Thanks, David. Great to be here.
Yeah, great to have you here, Dennis. Appreciate you taking the time to join us today. And we're going to give you a chance to kick this thing off and tell a little bit about your story. We'd love to learn a little bit about your history, what led you to Ogilvy, and some information for our listeners as well about what Ogilvy and your group is doing for its customers.
Fantastic. Thanks, David. So like a lot of people on this call, I grew up in brand management in CPG packaged goods. And then I realized that the convergence of marketing and computers was pretty intriguing to me. So I moved from brand management to direct marketing. And I ended up as VP of marketing in the credit card division at Citibank, where we did some targeted marketing innovation with some of our airline partners like American Airlines. Then from there, as CRM kicked in and got really hot, I moved to Bank of America, where I was the SVP of customer experience at Bank of America. Then from Bank of America to Hewlett Packard, where I ran CX Global Services for HP. And it was really there where the whole intersection of data and marketing and tech and people came to me, and I realized it's all about data. So here I am at Ogilvy running everything and all things data.
That is so cool. And I love how you bring culture and people into it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was just going to say the connection between the customer experience and your role now as Chief Data Officer just sort of really ties it all together on how data is so related to the customer experience.
Absolutely. It is the lifeblood of CX and marketing.
That's really cool. Yeah. Well, let's get into this first topic of data-driven personalization. And what comes to mind for you on this topic, Dennis? We'll let you kick us off.
So just to set context, Ogilvy, as you know, we have clients across the globe. They're the major brands. You know them all by name. And for the purposes of context, as I talk about some of these use cases and case studies, I'll be using a B2C model, an omni-channel, multi-brand model, marketing to the same household. Because, I find that in terms of scale, scope, complexity of data, B2C has a lot of unique challenges. So that'll be the context. But in terms of data-driven personalization, I kind of see it as 10 areas: data collection and integration. Where can we get data from as customers touch us in the channels, or the CRM systems, or the transaction data? How do we get first-party, zero-party data, get it in a logical or physical place where we can analyze it and do good things in predictive and prescriptive modeling? Then the second piece of it is customer segmentation. What audiences are being generated? How do we convert those audiences from unknown to known to segments that are actionable, and all the way down to one-to-one individuals through identity resolution and techniques such as that? And the third piece is customer profile and customer 360, what I call the golden record. How do we get that total view as to how they're touching us? What are their channel preferences? What are their product preferences? What are our predictive systems telling us about what the next best action should be for this customer? Then the next bucket is dynamic content personalization. What we are evolving to is we're moving from what I call a static content environment where DMPs, data management platforms, and DAMs, digital asset management platforms, are being replaced in most major brands by CDPs, customer data platforms. And so that this is a big issue. And of course, the approach of the cookieless world is a big issue.
Mm.
So the question facing all the brands is, how do we get first party data on our customers organized in a way where we can beat our competitors? How do we get zero party data, which is the loyalty piece of this, the data the customer willingly provides? And how do we compensate them to give us zero party data that we can use to beat our competitors? And then the next piece is, personalized recommendations, behavioral triggers, privacy, consent, and trust. How do we use the customer experience? How do we use data to become a trusted brand that has a high degree of empathy, and we're creating loyal connections to these customers that cannot be broken by our competitors? So those are some of the things that we're working on today in data-driven personalization, and why it's so hot and on CEOs' radar screens.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's so much to unpack there. We talk on this show a lot about the value exchange that is required, right, in order to build that trust and obtain that that first party data from consumers, and that's super important, right? It's about being able to build an experience, right? A customer experience that the customer feels like they're getting some sort of value in exchange for the data that they're giving up. And if you do it right, I think that most consumers are okay with that. Most consumers are okay with sharing their data with a brand that they trust, especially if they feel like they're getting some value back in exchange for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And Gen Z and millennials are more willing to share data than ever before. And the value exchange is a core part of our personalization strategy at Ogilvy. So the question becomes, depending on the nature of the product, let's use CPG, packaged goods, as an example. We have an oral care client where the question becomes, what do you give to this customer to give us data back that we can use in personalization and targeting to beat our competitors? Is it some kind of point system? Is it discounts on products and bundles? We are constantly and continuously testing that kind of value exchange.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes sense. And we had somebody else on this podcast once before, talked about the technology that they had, which was really related to, and it's crazy, you would never even think this, but I guess it was a gas station or something. Was it one of those?
Gas stations, yes.
Yeah, it was literally gas stations. And you think to yourself, and what they were trying to do is get more customer engagement. And they were able to navigate that in a way that I never even would have thought of. And it was in social media. And they were actually able to get people to share and take pictures and things like that in social media that that drove engagement with this gas station chain. And I thought that was amazing. It's just about creativity sometimes.
Yeah, gasoline loyalty cards are very complex marketers, right? They have a lot of data on their customers, transaction, how they buy gasoline, what gasoline they buy, how frequently they buy it. And it's a very high involvement product. So customers are willing to share their data, like to get discounts on gas, because the price is constantly going up. And it's a big part of their lives, right? So they're very willing in the gasoline card space to share their data.
It's really interesting. I really like how with everything you said, it really just comes down to getting the right data to be more human in what we're doing and using data, for empathy. And so I'm just curious, this is a good transition into the next topic with AdTech and MarTech integration. how do we use data along with AdTech and MarTech integration to continue having that human experience?
Yeah, next to personalization and hyper personalization, integration of AdTech and MarTech is like second hottest on our radar screen. Everybody wants to do it. Few people know how to do it, but we're helping a lot of companies along that journey. For example, I'll make it real. I'll make it real for you. We developed a AdTech MarTech integration solution, and I was in a meeting with the CEO of Ogilvy, and I mentioned this new solution that we were launching, and he zeroed right in on the key issue that a CEO would zero in on. And he said, so I can look at my total ROI across ad spend and marketing conversion spend through across the entire continuum. I said, yeah, that's the differentiator for the product. And so he zeroed right in on that big point. And the C-suite today, what I'm seeing is they are interested in what is my total, not only the ROAS, the return on ad spend, right? But what is my total ROMI, the return on marketing spend across the entire continuum? So an auto manufacturer client, for example, if you are spending $50 million in Super Bowl ads, the CEO is always asking the ad executive, well, how many sales am I going to get back for those really expensive commercials? And as you guys know, throughout the decades, the answer has been, we don't know, because it's general media, right? And it's not measurable. So, but with today's AdTech MarTech integration, one of the things that we're working on diligently is, for example, in the Super Bowl ad, you see the QR code, that comes up in the bottom part of the screen. We're really emphasizing this connection between the general media, unknown audience world, and getting those people to self-identify and become direct-to-consumer customers. So by scanning, once you scan that QR code from the Super Bowl commercial on your TV, you go into the database and we start building our 360-degree view. And then we continuously build the progressive profile until we have enough rich and robust and rich data to build advantage and value for you as a consumer.
I mean,
Yeah.
speaking of QR codes, maybe this is a cheap time to pull ours up for OmniIQ, but yeah, no, you you
I love that.
mentioned it. So yeah, I also love QR codes.
Yeah, it's amazing actually because like you said, for the first time now, you can take literally just general media, linear TV media that was never really truly measurable before, and get that feedback. And actually, you can get it pretty instantly. Wasn't there a Super Bowl ad that was literally just a QR code this year?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it was for some
Coinbase?
yeah, was it Coinbase? Yeah, it was one of the cryptos, but yeah, it was totally, brilliant, if nothing else, just to put that up,
Yeah, we're really excited about QR codes because the way that QR codes came on the scene is like everything else in CX. They operated in their own silo, like in their first generation. But now we can scan a QR code and instantaneously data is spread ubiquitously, not only inside the app, but to the corporate 360 database systems, right? To engage in immediate downstream, what I call near real-time retargeting. So once you scan that QR code, everything goes into motion. All the retargeting across what I call the triad of CX: click to web, web to web, and web back to click. How do we close that loop and do a continuous customer engagement retargeting and nurturing strategy? It all starts when they scan that QR code.
Yeah. And if your identity graph is super strong, right, then you can resolve that back to a household as well.
Exactly.
And so now you're like, whoa, all of a sudden, you're getting not just that immediate feedback, but now you can pinpoint all the households that, engaged with that ad.
Absolutely. Most important, excellent point, David. the thing about CPG, for example, the company I used earlier, they have multiple brands that can all be sold to the same household. But what I learned after becoming engaged with this client is they're leaving a lot of revenue on the table because they're not building the 360-degree view in a way that lets us know the household composition. Because what we found in the oral care space is that one of the heads of households like one particular brand, another head of household likes a different brand. The kids like yet another brand. The kids can either be manual toothbrush or electric toothbrush. So you have to understand the household composition so you can sell and strategically price bundles across all of your brands and product factories, because toothbrushes and toothpastes are two different product factories. But yet you have to bundle them into one strategically priced offer for the household. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you're leaving a ton of revenue on the table.
Absolutely. Yes. Well, I think that's a good place to transition into data-driven customer experience, because I know that, I see bad data and advertisements all the time, especially on TV these days. And so, that definitely impacts brand. But what comes to mind for you with data-driven customer experience, Dennis, and how that impacts brand?
Well, the data-driven customer experience, the way that I look at it is what I call the brand customer gap. So we have a methodology at Ogilvy that we use to close the brand customer gap, and we call it BX plus CX, brand experience plus customer experience. And what does that mean? What that means is that if you look at, as consumers, you know this yourselves, of course, we all know it on this call. When there isn't any technology, whether it's a sweet technology or whether it's some type of clever integration of point solutions, managing the customer journey and running the customer experience, there are gaps in between the technology silos, between the apps. And I don't like to use the terminology app stack because it implies that it's a vertical thing. But so app stacks are really horizontal in nature, the ones that face consumers, the ones that face marketing users, et cetera. And there's gaps between these application functionalities. And that's where customers get frustrated, they defect, we leave revenue on the table, is in the gaps. So the way that we look at BX plus CX is we use customer experience to close the brand gaps. And it's more important than ever and accelerating because companies like McKinsey, whatever research think tank that you use, have produced research that says that the customer experience is becoming as big a part of loyalty as the product attributes themselves, right? So if you own a BMW, right, it's a driving machine, right? The ultimate driving machine is their positioning. So BMW buyers love the physical attributes of the BMW product, the engineering attributes. But yet, it's really that experience at the local BMW dealership that really keeps them repurchasing BMWs, right? And not defecting to Mercedes or Porsche or somewhere else. So the brand experience and the customer experience are converging, from that perspective.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think that, going back to our point earlier about the importance of the data tied to that, is that data needs to be accurate. I'll give you an example. I got a thing in the mail this week from T-Mobile, and they made me an offer saying, I don't know what it was, but some sort of pricing. I'm calling out T-Mobile here on this because their data was bad. The offer was some sort of special pricing for people that that are 55 and over, and I'm not quite there yet, and that they're rushing me by a few years. But I thought that was pretty poor that they didn't, that they sent out something that was that targeted, yet their target was wrong.
Right. Yes, data accuracy is a continuing problem But as technology gets better, there's less and less excuse. We should be able to enrich the data and
Yeah,
continuously make it more accurate. However, it does take, to your point, a data governance function that's focused on data quality.
for sure.
Definitely.
So
Absolutely.
that will never go away. I mean, that's a human job that probably won't be replaced by AI. But just to expand that point a little further, the co-creation issue is also emerging as a huge issue in data-driven CX and brand. And co-creation back to the auto brand, right? Now you can go in on BMW's site and configure your own BMW, and also set a price ceiling, and configure your own car. And the configurator goes to work and designs your own car for you. They lay some AI on top of it, right, to use some of the data you provided to do a little bit better job on colors and so forth. But the issue of co-creation is a big one, and that can be applied to many B2C industries like insurance, banking, et cetera. So we're seeing this huge rise in co-creation. And a couple of years ago, people would never buy a $90,000 BMW online by pressing a button, right? But
Yeah.
about 26% of people do now, right?
Yep.
And then the issue of, okay, they were shopping, they configured their BMW, they didn't buy online as a DTC customer, but we created this great hot lead for the local BMW dealer. So we sent it to the dealer closed the deal. So this issue of co-creation, whether it's being used to do an online sale or create a hot lead for a dealer to follow up on, is an emerging issue.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I mean, I just did it. I mean, I lost 2 cars in a hurricane. So I purchased one. I'm in Florida. I purchased one in Michigan, and it was a used vehicle, but I purchased it online and they sent it to me. It was as easy as that. So yeah, and now that we're on that and we're talking about this whole customer experience, and you mentioned AI, I have to bring it up. When are we going to get to the point where I can just describe the vehicle that I want? Hey, I type in an AI, I'm looking for a car that can do this, that has this and that, and it figures out what kind of car I want and gives me some choices. I think we're getting there. We had a similar conversation with somebody in the real estate space where they're working on technology will allow you to do that with a home.
Right, absolutely. Glad you brought that up. So back, as long as we're using auto B2C as a theme, we can go back to AI and auto marketing. So what's happening today, and this is being prototyped aggressively, is we used to have someone come in online and the menu would say, okay, well, what are you looking for? SUV, sedan, blah, blah, blah. Okay. And people would go, well, I like SUV. What's your favorite color? Green, blah, blah, blah. The engines, if the car manufacturer was advanced 5 years ago, they could reach into the content management systems, the CMS systems, or the digital asset management, the DAM systems, and they could pull up a picture of a green Porsche SUV. And it would be presented to the customer, and they go, yeah, exactly what I'm looking for, right? And then they'd go to work on the interior, and it would be, saddle leather. Now, using just a little bit of information combined with some identity resolution technologies and identity graph technologies, generative AI can actually start creating a custom green SUV picture real time in session, instead of reaching into the content management systems for a picture of a green SUV. So that's the direction this is all going. You could, in the next generation, you'll be able just to talk into your computer and say, well, that green is nice, but let's see what a silver one looks like. and boom, generative AI will just push the silver one. It'll paint the SUV from green to silver right in front of your eyes, real time.
Mhm.
Wow. That's so
Cool.
interesting.
Yeah.
Well, anything else on data-driven customer experience and the impact on brand that either of you want to touch on before we move on? You good
I
there?
think there's always more we can add, but now at the same time, we want to make sure we get all
All
our
right. Well, then let's jump
customers.
into tech stack, Dennis. And I know, we're not going to be mentioning any specific brands, but in terms of like your tech stack, what tools, are you and your team, relying on these days?
Well, I think we can kind of go around the horn and talk about categories of the tech array. There's, of course, web search engines, email, social, personalization engines, contextual content um, systems, mobile first apps, and end-to-end measurement systems. Those are kind of those are the macro categories that I kind of lump technology in. And we know a lot of the big brand names. Everybody attending this call, the big brand names, right? If they're in a marketing department or an advertising department, they look at Forrester and Gartner and the Magic Quadrants, and they know the brand names. So I'll just stick with the category. But the types of technologies that are really on the horizon are the connection between CDPs and personalization engines. That seems to be the nexus where there's just a lot of value being added, where we're getting really good results. Like in POCs, we're getting significant incremental conversion lifts versus a baseline group sample in that nexus, because CDPs bring a whole new dimension to the table of identity resolution and first party data that we didn't have before. So the testing opportunities in that CDP personalization stack ecosystem are endless, right? And so that brings me to innovation. I mean, the way that we think of it at Ogilvy is we operate at the intersection of process, data, analytics, technology, people, and innovation. So we have to constantly innovate using new data. Why did this response rate go up here? And why did it go down there? Why did this customer defect? Where are the gaps in the data? So just going back to the brand discussion that we had just a minute ago, the soundbite for the audience is just remember this: the gaps in the customer experience. I propose you get really savvy and agile at identifying the gaps, but also quantifying the impact on the customer experience, both on the positive side and the negative side. Then going to the C-suite with a business case and saying, hey, here are the gaps we have to close. Because on this gap, we're leaving revenue on the table. And on this gap, customers are defecting in mass because they don't like the experience here. So you've got to get really good at identifying those brand customer gaps.
It's a really great point.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good point. It ties into things we've talked about here in the past, the importance of not just having, looking at technologies and marketing technologies or ed technologies that you're using as sort of a tech stack, but looking at it as operations, marketing operations, and being able to tie those operations and all of your marketing activities into, into sort of the cost factor and your return. And so if you can do all of that and tie it all together and quantify it, like you said, it's super valuable. And being able to quantify that enables you to really, maximize your returns.
Absolutely. And that can be a very difficult thing to do. But
Sure.
instead of getting into that, let's dive a little bit into learning more about you, Dennis. And so, Dennis, one thing we like to ask our guests is if you could go back to a time when you first came into the industry, what is the number one piece of advice you would give yourself?
Great question. Haven't really thought about it. But in terms of what advice I would give myself would be think harder about the holistic nature of the customer experience and the customer journey and the customer tech ecosystem. We have a tendency, and you see this today in big corporations, and I'm as guilty as anyone at this. When every time a new technology seemed to emerge, web 2.0, and then web 3.0, and then search engines, and then new mobile tech, and so forth, we tend to focus on it as it's the shiny new object, and it's going to solve all of our problems, right? And guilty here. But that's not the way it works. The way it works is it's a holistic ecosystem. As lofty as that sounds, I would give myself the advice as to look at these new developments, these new technologies holistically and as part of an ecosystem that closes the brand customer gaps, right? Instead of thinking of them only as a standalone silo. And the organizational issue comes to mind. And, David and I were talking about this at kind of the top of the call before we went live. This issue of culture is the biggest silo. And I'll give you an example of what I mean. Even today, here we are, two decades and more into the CX revolution. And yet, when we deal with our clients, they have a executive dedicated to email. They have an executive dedicated to social. They have an executive dedicated to e-commerce. And when you talk to these people, they are laser focused on their silo and meeting the KPIs that they're compensated and promoted by. And the organizational structure in most large brand companies today is contrary to an integrated customer experience. So my advice to myself would be an advocate for the consumer. Even in the face of these cultural challenges, these political challenges, these organizational pushbacks that you get, I would say be an advocate for the end user consumer and be that leader, be that champion, go to bat and say, hey, this just isn't an email issue, right? This is an email plus digital issue. This is a click to web issue. This is a web to web issue. This is a web back to click issue. Cross those silos and look inside to your brand the way your prospects and consumers look in. That would be the advice that I would give myself.
That's awesome. I love that. Think holistically, because you're absolutely right. People are quick to want to apply new technologies without taking into consideration how it can be effectively integrated into everything they do, instead of just sort of saying, okay, I'm going to use it and I'm going to use it for this. It becomes siloed, a lot of them. And I think that creates silos when you don't take that sort of holistic view of how it can improve, many areas of the business. So that's awesome. Thank you. That's great feedback.
Yeah, it's definitely so easy to just, rely on data sometimes, and all the new technology, but really, going back to Ogilvy and the original, some of the original, people who wrote about marketing, we got to continue to talk to our customers and keep it a human experience too, right? That's the best data is from them. So really great feedback. And going off of that, are there any other lessons you've learned along the way from, past jobs, if not this one or your current job, that you think everyone should know?
Yeah, it kind of ties to the last thing we discussed about the holistic vision, the holistic point of view. But what I've really learned is that even here today in the year 2023, the business unit executives, the product factory executives inside your companies, right? They act in their own best interest. And very few of them are compensated for a total customer experience, total share of wallet. The great majority of them are compensated on their business unit performance. And as a CX executive, right, that's going across channels, across business units, across product factories, by definition, your job is to represent the consumer internally. And no matter how much it hurts, sometimes you gotta make your case. You have to not only make the financial case in the form of a business case that's scalable and profitable, but you kind of have to make the leadership case, with some degree of passion, as well as the financial case. That's probably the biggest thing I've learned is that people, back to this whole theme of today. I think the most common question I get when I meet a client for the first time is, what technology do I need? And the answer is, it depends. And that's not a cop-out, right? And it's not being evasive, because really we're an advisory team. The answer is, what gaps do you need to close with your consumers and prospects? What are the use cases that close those gaps? How do we convert those use cases to business requirements? How do we convert those business requirements to tech requirements? So back to the tech stack. That's kind of what I've learned. And when my team, that's how I coach them and mentor them, is you've got to think in the consumer's shoes and then passionately execute.
Great point.
Yep.
Anything you would add to that, David?
I like it. I mean, look, I had an interestingly similar conversation today with a major media brand where they asked me, well, they basically said, well, how can you help us? And I said, well, that depends. What are the problems you're having? And this was all about identity. It was all about identity data. And so I posed to them, I said, well, I'll make a few assumptions here. You probably are having issues with respect to, on the identity side, with respect to addressability, when building ad campaigns for your client base. You're probably having issues with ad performance related to identity. And I said, if these things resonate with you, let me know. And then we have a solution that can help for you. And he came back and said, absolutely, both of those. I'm like, okay, good. Now we've established what the problems are. Now let's talk about the solution and how we can help you. So.
Yeah, and in addition to that tech question that I get a lot, the other question I get is suite, right? Big holistic monolithic marketing suite versus best in breed technology array. Tech stack. That is the second biggest question I get, and it's such a hot topic today. But the issue is kind of what I've learned, and this is a generalization. But if you have a very complex B2C model that's multi-channel, omni-channel, ubiquitous 24/7 globally, multiple brands and product factories are feeding the channels. Usually, not all the time, a best-in-breed solution is going to be necessary for you to close those brand customer gaps. Now, the flip side of a best-in-breed solution is the total cost of ownership, right? The operating cost of the tech is typically higher. But if you can drive your revenue, your marginal revenue from the household faster than the marginal cost of having a more complex tech stack, you'll be ahead on customer lifetime value. You'll be in the positive. So those are the kinds of trade-offs and type of advice, that we give clients all the time. And the other tech issue, other than marketing suites versus best in breed, is CDPs. A lot of our clients don't understand that there are three types of CDPs. There are marketing suite CDPs, right? The ones that are hooked to the big marketing suite, the big MarTech players. Then there are what we call smart hubs, which are CDPs with built-in inline analytics and AI that you can buy off the shelf that do a reasonably fair job, right? And then there are data integration CDPs, which are really just the new generation of DMPs, right? They're more of a straightforward data management platform. They don't have the built-in sophisticated analytics. So there's three types of CDPs, and that discussion really comes up a lot. You know, which CDP do I need? And we help clients decide what they need based on their business strategy.
Sure. It depends.
It depends.
Oh man, this was a great discussion. Thank you so much, Dennis. And in closing, how can our audience find you?
Dennis.DeGregor, DEGREGOR, at Verticurl or at Ogilvy. I have two email addresses, .com.
Nice. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, we appreciate you joining us on the show today. I think we had a great conversation, and I think our listeners and viewers got to hear some really great insights, and we appreciate you being here for that and joining us.
Great. It was great fun, David and Jesse. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Absolutely. And before we go, I know we already brought up the QR code to tell our audience a little about OmniIQ. It's the ultimate app to help you better understand your audience and target your audience with your first-party data. So I can pull back up the QR code for anybody who is watching the video of this. Of course, if you're listening on the podcast later on, you'll just want to go to BDEX.com and try it for free. But anything you'll want to chime in about OmniIQ, David?
No, it's perfect. Upload your first-party data, get some analytics, and even build extended audiences to improve your targeting. And that's it in a nutshell, I guess.
Absolutely. Well, we would love to hear from listeners. If you know someone else that we should interview as a guest, or if there's any topics you would like to have covered, feel free to send your qualitative data with us send your qualitative data to us so we can make this better for you. And you can reach us at info@bdex.com. But thanks again for joining us on Deconstructing Data, and we'll see you next time.